about us, about humanity, and how we respond when the world tightens its grip. When the familiar is disrupted, fear enters the room. Panic spreads faster than any storm. But history has taught us this: when everything seems locked down, the human spirit finds a key. When a vital strait is closed, the entire world feels its pulse slow. This isn't just a local incident, it's a global chokehold. Shipping lanes serve as the arteries of the modern economy, carrying goods, fuel, food, and medicine across continents. When one strait shuts down, cargo piles up, tankers reroute, and prices surge. The global supply chain, normally smooth and almost invisible, suddenly becomes headline news. Everything from electronics to grain becomes uncertain. This reminds us how interconnected we are. A single narrow passageway can hold the world hostage. The conclusion is unavoidable. We are far more vulnerable than we choose to believe. The moment the strait closes, supply chains experience immediate ripple effects. Ports begin to backlog. Ships that were on tight schedules are now adrift in uncertainty. Contracts are broken. Production lines halt. Supermarkets and factories alike begin to feel the sting of missing parts and materials. And in a world built on just-in-time delivery, there's no buffer. What seemed efficient suddenly seems fragile. The entire logistical ecosystem begins to buckle. This disruption reveals that efficiency without resilience is a dangerous game. The conclusion is clear. What we've built to run fast was never built to bend under pressure. One of the most immediate effects is the rise in oil prices. Because many vital straits are energy corridors, any disruption causes global panic in energy markets. Oil futures surge, fuel prices spike, transportation becomes more expensive, which in turn increases the cost of everything else. Nations scramble to find alternatives, but few are prepared for the sudden shock. It's not just economic, it's a political trigger as well. Leaders face public pressure, protests erupt, from highways to households, the cost of panic is paid by everyone. The conclusion is urgent. Dependency on narrow routes creates wide-reaching consequences. Small countries and developing economies suffer the most. While powerful nations may afford alternative trade routes, poorer ones don't have the luxury. A delay in medical supplies or food imports can spiral into a crisis. Shortages lead to social unrest, hunger, and even destabilization of governments. The global supply chain, in theory, connects everyone, but not equally. When it breaks, the weakest links feel it first and hardest. This exposes a moral and structural imbalance in global trade. The conclusion we cannot ignore. Supply chain vulnerability is not just a logistical issue. It is a humanitarian one. Businesses also face massive disruptions. Manufacturers dependent on overseas components find themselves unable to meet deadlines. Retailers face empty shelves. Prices go up, demand goes down, and confidence collapses. Profits shrink. Stocks fall. Insurance claims rise. The private sector is hit with uncertainty, which it hates more than anything else. Investors become jittery, boardrooms panic, strategic plans crumble. The entire economic engine, which depends on predictability, is thrown into chaos. The conclusion becomes evident. Modern business models are dangerously exposed when global supply lines are severed. Consumers quickly feel the ripple effect. They may not understand geopolitics or trade flows, but they know when prices rise and products vanish. Everyday essentials become luxury items. Delivery times stretch into weeks. Inflation accelerates. Economic inequality becomes sharper as the rich can hoard and the poor can't access. The convenience of global commerce disappears in an instant. Public frustration mounts. Political leaders are blamed. Trust in systems begins to erode. The conclusion is stark. The world's economic pain from a closed strait is personal, felt in kitchens, wallets, and daily lives across the globe. Technology companies, which rely on rare materials and global assembly lines, find themselves paralyzed. A single missing component can stall the production of thousands of devices. From semiconductors to batteries, these high-tech lifelines are no longer guaranteed. Innovation stalls. Global competitiveness shifts. Entire industries lose momentum. And with tech at the center of modern civilization, from communication to security, the consequences grow dire. What starts as a logistical problem becomes a strategic threat. The conclusion here is unmistakable. A closed strait today can set back technological progress for years. Agriculture is not spared either. Many countries import grains, fertilizers, or livestock feed through maritime trade routes. A blocked strait delays these shipments, pushing up food prices and leading to shortages. For countries dependent on imports, even a brief disruption can threaten food security. Farmers miss growing windows, supermarkets ration supplies. In poorer nations, hunger becomes a crisis. The ripple effect of a closed strait isn't limited to factories and fuel tanks. It stretches to fields and plates. The conclusion grows more sobering. The world's ability to feed itself is precariously balanced on narrow maritime paths. The environmental cost is another concern. Rerouted ships travel longer distances, burning more fuel and increasing carbon emissions. Congestion in alternate ports leads to dumping, pollution, and mismanagement of waste. Emergency responses to shortages often neglect sustainability in favor of speed. In trying to fix one crisis, we create another. Maritime bottlenecks already stress marine ecosystems, and now they're being pushed beyond limits. Environmental regulations are bypassed. Oceans become highways of desperation. The conclusion is simple but severe. Our race to restore supply comes at the cost of our planet's health. In the end, the closure of a single strait exposes the entire architecture of modern civilization. It reveals the illusion of stability. It forces us to confront our dependency on fragile systems that were never truly tested. It opens our eyes to how narrow the line is between efficiency and chaos. It is not just a shipping disruption. It is a global mirror, reflecting our overconfidence and underpreparedness. We are connected, yes, but also collectively exposed. The final conclusion is this. Unless we redesign supply chains for resilience, not just speed, we are always one closed strait away from global panic. When a vital strait is closed, it's not just trade that stops, political pressure begins to boil. Choke points are more than shipping lanes. They are strategic flashpoints, deeply tied to national interests. Any obstruction, whether accidental or intentional, can be seen as an act of aggression or a threat to sovereignty. Countries whose economies depend on access to these straits respond quickly, sometimes irrationally, fearing both financial loss and strategic disadvantage. Diplomats scramble, military alerts are raised, and political leaders begin issuing statements. The conclusion is clear. A closed strait is never just an economic issue, it's a trigger for geopolitical confrontation. In such moments, accusations fly faster than facts. One side blames the other for the disruption, claiming sabotage or hidden agendas. Governments begin weaponizing language, labeling one another as aggressors or destabilizers. The media joins the fray, amplifying every whisper into a roar, further deepening distrust. Domestic politics also play a role. Leaders use the crisis to rally support, deflect criticism, or justify emergency powers. Truth becomes the first casualty in a fog of nationalist rhetoric and media hysteria. The conclusion is sobering. In a time of tension, misinformation becomes a weapon and diplomacy becomes dangerously fragile. Military forces are often the first responders, not aid workers or negotiators. Warships begin to patrol near the closed strait, air surveillance increases, and troops may be placed on alert. This show of force is intended as deterrence, but it often invites escalation. A single misstep, a misread radar signal, or an accidental collision could ignite a conflict. Nations with historical rivalries or territorial claims see the crisis as a chance to assert control or shift regional balance. The conclusion is ominous. Where military might meets political uncertainty, the potential for war grows rapidly and recklessly. Alliances get tested and redrawn in real time. If the closed strait affects multiple nations, their interests must now align or clash. Regional blocs such as NATO, ASEAN, or the Arab League may be pulled into the fray. Superpowers often take sides, offering support, sending envoys, or deploying assets in the name of peacekeeping. But even peacekeeping can be provocative if it means increasing military presence. What starts as a localized incident transforms into an international standoff. The conclusion becomes urgent. A closed strait can destabilize not just two countries, but entire regions and existing global alliances. In many cases, economic sanctions follow political accusations. Countries that feel wronged or threatened may respond with sanctions blocking imports, freezing assets, or banning exports. These retaliatory moves may seem like alternatives to war, but often cause economic suffering on both sides. Global investors pull out, currencies weaken, financial trust erodes. The weaponization of economics rarely stays contained and often sparks broader instability. Diplomatic solutions become harder as both sides become locked into cycles of punishment. The conclusion is evident. Once politics replaces reason and retaliation replaces resolution, economic warfare becomes a tool for real-world damage. Internal politics often complicate foreign decisions. Leaders facing domestic pressure may find it easier to adopt hardline stances. Strongman behavior plays well in times of crisis, and political opposition can be silenced under the veil of national security. A strait closing becomes a convenient excuse to clamp down on civil liberties, push military budgets, or shift focus away from internal failures. Citizens already stressed by shortages and fear are fed patriotism instead of peace. This leads to even less room for diplomacy. The conclusion is disturbing. Geopolitics often escalates not because of global logic, but because of internal political survival. Propaganda machines move into overdrive. Governments begin to control narratives through state-run media or social influence campaigns. The strait closure becomes a symbol, a rallying cry, or a justification for decades of old grievances. Emotional manipulation replaces rational dialogue. Citizens are told who to fear, who to blame, and what sacrifices must be made. In this environment, the truth matters less than the usefulness of the story being told. Hate grows quickly. Tolerance dies quietly. The conclusion here is chilling. In geopolitical crises, the war for hearts and minds begins long before any battlefield encounter. Neighboring countries also get drawn in unwillingly. A closed strait that affects one region may compel nearby nations to take sides, or at least respond diplomatically or militarily. Some will attempt to broker peace, but others may see the situation as an opportunity to gain territory, influence, or resources. Neutrality becomes difficult. Refugees may begin to flee. Airspace, water access, and land borders may be violated in the name of national security. The regional spillover turns the crisis into a multi-layered conflict. The conclusion is hard to ignore. Geopolitical fires do not burn in isolation. They spread fast and wide. Global institutions often fail to act decisively. Organizations like the United Nations may issue statements, call emergency sessions, or send peace missions, but bureaucracy slows everything down. Veto powers, political alliances, and funding issues dilute their influence. Meanwhile, the crisis deepens. Citizens wonder why global institutions exist if they can't prevent such chaos. Trust in diplomacy begins to erode not just between governments, but between governments and their people. The conclusion becomes painfully obvious. When global institutions lack teeth, the world becomes a playground for the powerful and a battlefield for the rest. Ultimately, a closed strait is not just a physical blockade. It's a symbolic one. It represents the world's inability to share power, navigate difference, and act with unity in times of stress. Every incident that escalates into panic reveals the weakness of our global political framework. In a world defined by borders, sovereignty, and suspicion, collaboration becomes a last resort rather than a first instinct. We are all affected, yet we act apart. The final conclusion is this. Geopolitical tension around a strait reveals not just strategic weaknesses, but moral and systemic ones we must urgently address or risk repeating. When a critical strait closes, the first tremors are felt in the global economy. Prices surge within hours, driven by speculation and fear rather than actual shortages. Oil, gas, and commodities that once flowed freely become scarce, or are feared to be. Financial markets react almost instantly, wiping billions off indices. Investors pull back. Currency values fluctuate. Panic grips traders who see a chain reaction unfolding. Even the anticipation of delay becomes its own form of disruption. The conclusion is stark. The economy is not built on materials alone. It's built on the assumption that those materials will always move freely. Oil markets are among the first to feel the shock. A closed strait often blocks access to major oil exporting nations, causing global futures to spike. Even if physical supplies remain temporarily adequate, psychological pressure inflates prices. Countries scramble to secure reserves. Transportation, power generation, and industry all grow more expensive. Inflation spreads. Consumers feel it at the gas pump, businesses feel it in operating costs, and governments feel it in balance of trade deficits. In energy dependent economies, this becomes a serious threat. The conclusion is urgent. Energy volatility caused by choke point disruptions can paralyze entire economic systems in mere days. Global shipping insurance also reacts swiftly. With heightened risks in transit, insurers raise premiums dramatically. This means every item being transported becomes more expensive, even if it isn't directly affected by the closed strait. Some routes become uninsurable. Companies are forced to delay shipments, reroute vessels, or absorb rising costs. These expenses are passed along the supply chain, from manufacturers to retailers to end consumers. Even industries not geographically near the incident are affected. The economic ripple effect expands in multiple directions. The conclusion is clear. When risk rises in one narrow place, financial instability spreads across the entire globe. Stock markets hate uncertainty, and nothing causes more of it than a sudden geopolitical and logistical shock. Investors begin to sell off stocks tied to affected sectors: shipping, energy, imports, exports, and tech manufacturing. As panic spreads, safe haven assets like gold or treasury bonds increase in demand. National stock markets can lose value overnight, reducing consumer confidence and business expansion plans. Smaller investors, already vulnerable, suffer the most. Pension funds, retirement plans, and savings take unexpected hits. The conclusion becomes bitterly evident. Financial markets don't wait for facts. They react to fear, making economic shockwaves even more violent and unpredictable. Trade routes don't just carry goods, they carry economic stability. When they are disrupted, the entire balance of trade is thrown off. Countries that rely on exporting raw materials can no longer sell. Importing nations can't receive essential supplies. Trade deficits widen. Foreign exchange reserves dwindle. Governments are forced to either raise interest rates or take on debt. Balance of payment crises loom. For already fragile economies, this is a dangerous slide toward recession or collapse. The international financial structure starts cracking at the edges. The conclusion becomes unavoidable. Trade disruptions in one strait can spiral into nationwide and even global economic disasters. Inflation is perhaps the most dangerous outcome of these disruptions. As supply tightens and demand stays constant or grows, prices begin to surge across all sectors. Central banks find themselves in a bind. Raising interest rates can slow inflation, but it also slows recovery. Consumers find their money buys less. Basic needs, food, fuel, and medicine, become more expensive. This can lead to public unrest, wage demands, and political instability. Inflation is not just an economic figure, it's a human burden. The conclusion is sobering. The economic shock from one strategic closure transforms quickly into a cost of living crisis for millions around the world. In poorer countries, the pain cuts deeper. These nations often lack financial buffers, energy reserves, or alternative supply chains. A closed strait may delay not just products, but humanitarian aid, medical shipments, or food imports. Economic shocks become health shocks, malnutrition rises, clinics run out of supplies, unemployment grows. The informal economy expands, but so does poverty. The effects of such a disruption don't vanish when the strait reopens. They linger, forming long-term economic scars. The conclusion is painfully clear. Economic shockwaves from trade route disruptions hit the vulnerable first and hardest, with consequences that last well beyond the crisis itself. Large corporations try to mitigate risk by restructuring operations, but even they face massive losses. Factories dependent on just-in-time delivery halt production. Deadlines are missed. Contracts are broken. Brand reputation suffers. Shareholders get restless. As large employers shrink operations or lay off workers, national economies feel the impact. Governments may intervene with stimulus or bailouts, but that adds to national debt. Corporate finance, once considered stable, becomes another front of anxiety. Even diversification can't fully protect against such a massive jolt. The conclusion is clear. Economic resilience at the corporate level is still vulnerable to shocks born in faraway straits. The informal and gig economies, which sustain millions globally, are rarely protected during such disruptions. Couriers, day laborers, and freelancers depend on supply consistency to remain employed. A break in logistics halts services, reduces demand, or raises costs beyond what local economies can bear. These workers have no insurance, no benefits, and often no savings. Their economic survival is tied to fragile global flows that they don't control or understand. A strait closure, thousands of miles away, can wipe out local income for families who were already barely surviving. The conclusion is unmistakable. Economic shockwaves magnify inequality and punish the powerless. The economic shock from a closed strait often exposes deeper weaknesses in the global system. We operate under the illusion of infinite flow, relying on fragile links to hold everything together. There is little redundancy, little preparedness, and even less cooperation during crisis. Each new shock reveals a chain reaction waiting to happen. And while some countries or corporations may recover, others may collapse entirely. This isn't just an economic issue, it's a structural one. The final conclusion is this: until we reimagine global economics around resilience and redundancy, we remain one closed strait away from widespread economic collapse. When a critical strait is closed, the first wave that hits the public isn't material, it's emotional. Fear spreads faster than any economic shock or military deployment. People fear what they don't understand, and when vital routes are disrupted, uncertainty becomes a virus of its own. Questions flood social platforms. What happened? Who is responsible? What will happen to prices, to fuel, to food? In that void of clarity, panic seeds itself rapidly. The conclusion is immediate and impactful. In moments of disruption, fear becomes the dominant currency, exchanged faster than facts and valued more than logic. The modern media ecosystem thrives on urgency, and nothing creates urgency like a crisis. News channels race to be first, often sacrificing depth for speed. Headlines scream in red banners, dramatic visuals loop endlessly, and words like blockade, conflict, and catastrophe dominate broadcasts. Speculation is treated like certainty. Experts with limited knowledge become nightly fixtures. Viewers are fed a cocktail of adrenaline and dread. The media, intentionally or not, shapes how millions perceive the crisis. The conclusion is disturbing. When media prioritizes reaction over reflection, it doesn't just report fear, it multiplies it. Social media magnifies this effect exponentially. On platforms like X, Facebook, and TikTok, rumors outpace reports. Fake maps, deepfake videos, misquoted leaders, and out-of-context images spread without resistance. Algorithms reward engagement, not accuracy, so emotionally charged content goes viral. A misinterpreted statement from a diplomat or a blurry photo of a ship can create hysteria across borders. Panic trends globally within minutes. Authorities struggle to contain misinformation, often too late. The conclusion is clear. Social media turns fear into a wildfire, burning through reason before truth even arrives at the scene. Governments, feeling the heat of public fear, respond with a mix of overreaction and silence. Some try to reassure citizens, but their messages are often drowned out by louder, more dramatic voices online. Others impose restrictions, curfews, or emergency laws, which can intensify the sense of crisis. Politicians make bold statements that may not reflect reality but serve political agendas. In trying to control panic, they sometimes validate it. Public trust erodes. People begin to believe whispers more than warnings. The conclusion is alarming. Institutional response often lags behind digital chaos, allowing fear to shape policy instead of facts. Businesses, especially those in transport, fuel, and retail, face the brunt of consumer panic. As news spreads, people rush to hoard. Gas stations overflow, supermarkets empty, and online retailers crash under the weight of mass orders. Supply chain challenges worsen, not because of real scarcity, but because of perceived scarcity. Demand surges irrationally. Prices spike. This isn't driven by logistics but by fear. Consumers no longer act based on need but on anxiety. The conclusion is direct and dangerous. When fear dictates purchasing behavior, it manufactures the very shortages that people feared in the first place. Fear doesn't stop at economics. It infiltrates the psyche. People start seeing threats everywhere. Suspicion grows between communities. Foreign workers, immigrants, or people with different political views are scapegoated. Hate speech rises. Conspiracy theories spread like mold in the dark. They become the enemy, though no one knows who they are. Fear fractures society. Instead of uniting against uncertainty, people splinter into camps. Social harmony crumbles under the weight of paranoia. The conclusion is painful. Fear, once viral, doesn't just disrupt systems. It dismantles the human fabric that holds societies together. The psychological toll on individuals is severe. Anxiety disorders spike. Helplines report record calls. People struggle to sleep, obsess over news, and spiral into helplessness. When every news alert feels like doom and every grocery trip feels like preparation for war, mental health deteriorates. Children pick up on adult tension, families argue more, communities retreat into silence. The crisis moves from global headlines to personal homes, stealing peace and replacing it with chronic dread. The conclusion is undeniable. Unchecked fear becomes a silent pandemic, infecting the mind and soul long after the crisis itself subsides. Ironically, the demand for clarity grows, but the supply of reliable information shrinks. Credible experts are drowned out by charismatic influencers. Balanced journalism is ignored in favor of sensationalism. The public craves reassurance but consumes chaos. Truth becomes fragmented. People no longer agree on what is happening, who is right, or what must be done. Disagreement turns into division. Rational dialogue becomes impossible when everyone operates on different facts. The conclusion is sobering. In a world flooded by noise, the scarcest and most precious commodity becomes trusted truth. The rise of fear and media frenzy also distorts the response to real danger. When everything is labeled as catastrophic, people grow numb. Real warnings are treated like background noise. Crisis fatigue sets in. People either disengage or overreact. Decision makers become hesitant, unsure how their actions will be received by a panicked or skeptical public. In this vacuum of leadership and clarity, dangerous actors can exploit the confusion to push agendas, invade territories, or commit crimes under cover of chaos. The conclusion is chilling. A fearful world is not just a disoriented one, it's a vulnerable one. Eventually, the strait may reopen, the tension may ease, and supply chains may recover. But the fear doesn't vanish. It lingers, etched into memory and behavior. It creates long-term distrust in institutions, media, neighbors, and even oneself. People live cautiously, buy defensively, and vote reactively. A single moment of panic reshapes how a generation views stability. Fear, once ignited, leaves a lasting imprint. The final conclusion is this: while a closed strait can paralyze trade, it is fear, stoked by frenzy and sustained by confusion, that ultimately disrupts the world far longer than any blockade ever could. Would you like to proceed with the fifth key point, innovation and adaptation kick in the same 1000 word style? You said, expend fifth key point in 1000 words without any subheading with conclusion. Each paragraph will be 100 words, ChatGPT said. Here is a 1000 word expansion of the fifth key point, innovation and adaptation kick in, written in 10 paragraphs, each exactly 100 words, with a clear conclusion at the end of each paragraph. In the face of disruption, innovation often rises from necessity. When a strait closes and the world panics, the system is forced to think differently. The comfort of routine is shattered, and suddenly, solutions once deemed too expensive or too complex become essential. Industries that once depended on narrow channels of movement start investing in alternatives. Businesses brainstorm, engineers sketch, and entrepreneurs emerge. What once seemed impossible is now inevitable. In this pressure cooker of crisis, invention becomes survival. The conclusion is clear. Disruption creates discomfort, but discomfort becomes the birthplace of innovation that would never occur in stable times. Companies across the globe begin rethinking their supply chains. Traditional shipping lanes become liabilities instead of assets, and dependence on singular trade routes is replaced with a demand for diversity and flexibility. Organizations look to nearshoring, reshoring, and multi-route logistics. Technologies like blockchain are explored to track goods with more transparency. AI and predictive modeling help forecast demand shifts. New warehouse models are built closer to consumers. Businesses once driven by efficiency now pivot toward resilience. The conclusion is promising. Crises reveal the flaws in our systems, but they also unlock smarter, more adaptive supply chain strategies for the future. Energy, often at the heart of choke point disruptions, sees a wave of innovation as countries rush to reduce reliance on volatile supply routes. Governments push for renewable energy investments, solar, wind, geothermal at accelerated speeds. Green hydrogen is no longer theoretical but prioritized. Localized energy storage solutions like advanced battery networks are tested. Distributed grids get more funding. Emergency fuel reserves are restructured. What begins as a reaction to crisis becomes a roadmap to energy independence. The conclusion becomes inspiring. Moments of constraint accelerate the transition from dependence on old systems to empowerment through cleaner, more diversified energy sources. Technological development sees massive momentum. Companies and governments begin investing in automation to reduce labor dependency tied to disrupted routes. Robotics enhance warehousing. 3D printing evolves from novelty to necessity, enabling localized production of parts previously imported. Drone delivery systems receive funding and fast-tracked approvals. Smart transportation management platforms expand. Innovation is no longer isolated to R&D labs. It becomes public, fast, and driven by survival. Every blocked channel becomes an invitation to build something better. The conclusion is obvious. Constraint breeds creativity, and technology becomes the bridge over the obstacles that panic once made seem insurmountable. Education and training shift in response to these changes. As industries adapt, new skill demands emerge. Governments and institutions accelerate training programs for renewable energy technicians, logistics analysts, and AI system operators. Online platforms thrive as people reskill rapidly for the changing job landscape. Virtual simulations train workers in supply chain risk management, cybersecurity, and emergency response. The workforce becomes more agile and digitally fluent. The crisis doesn't just change infrastructure, it reshapes human capability. The conclusion is optimistic. In adapting to crisis, we elevate our workforce and prepare people for the demands of a faster, smarter, and more resilient future. Urban design and infrastructure evolve to reflect a new world of localized resilience. Cities begin designing micro-distribution centers, vertical farms, and autonomous delivery corridors. Municipalities invest in public broadband and digital mapping for last-mile logistics. Ports redesign for modular handling. New transportation hubs emerge to connect rail, road, and air more fluidly, bypassing dependency on vulnerable maritime bottlenecks. Local becomes powerful again. Communities realize the strength in self-reliance and efficient micro-networks. The conclusion is visionary. Adaptation to global constraints leads to smarter, more self-sustaining cities that are built to absorb future shocks without collapse. Financial innovation also plays a key role in adaptation. Faced with the unpredictability of crises, new insurance models are created that dynamically respond to disruptions in real time. Investment in resilient infrastructure becomes a new asset class. Fintech firms design tools to monitor global trade risks and help businesses hedge against geopolitical instability. Central banks rethink digital currencies and decentralized finance to reduce reliance on exposed markets. Capital begins flowing toward preparedness instead of speculation. The conclusion becomes strategic. When the world adapts financially, it protects its future not just through regulation, but through intelligent investment in resilience and readiness. Consumer behavior also evolves in response to disruption. As people see the impact of broken systems, they become more mindful of sourcing, sustainability, and circular consumption. Local products gain popularity. Subscription models shift toward need-based supply rather than endless consumption. Minimalism, repair culture, and ethical production move from niche to norm. The crisis serves as a wake-up call for public values. Society begins to question convenience-driven habits and instead embraces conscious adaptation. The conclusion is encouraging. Fear may initiate the change, but it is awareness and values that sustain a healthier, more adaptive pattern of consumption. Geopolitics too sees a shift. Nations begin exploring shared innovation programs, joint research initiatives, and regional manufacturing hubs. Former adversaries may find common ground in mutual vulnerability. International bodies gain momentum for standardizing crisis response protocols, trade route diversification, and digital collaboration frameworks. Sanctions and conflict may still exist, but so do cooperation and strategic partnerships formed out of necessity. New alliances are formed not only through ideology, but through the shared will to survive and rebuild better. The conclusion is hopeful. In adapting to disruption, nations discover new channels not of trade, but of trust and progress. Over time, the adaptation spurred by a closed strait outlives the crisis itself. Systems rebuilt under pressure prove stronger and more future-proof. What was once seen as reactive planning transforms into long-term innovation strategies. The fear that drove change is replaced by pride in progress. History may remember the panic, but it will also mark the solutions born from it. Humanity learns that it does not need to wait for crisis to evolve. The final conclusion is this: adaptation is not just a response to adversity. It is the evidence of human resilience and the driving force of sustainable evolution. Would you like the sixth key point, humanity's choice, chaos or collaboration, expanded next in the same format? You said? Expend sixth key point in 1,000 words without any subheading with conclusion. Each paragraph will be 100 words, ChatGPT said. Here is a 1000 word expansion of the sixth key point. Humanity's choice, chaos or collaboration, written in 10 paragraphs, each exactly 100 words, with a clear conclusion at the end of each paragraph. When crisis erupts, humanity stands at a forked path, either descend into chaos or rise through collaboration. A closed strait may seem like a logistical issue, but its ripple effect is deeply human. In that moment of disruption, societies reveal their values, instincts, and intentions. Fear can provoke division, but it can also present an opportunity for unity. The global reaction is never about the event alone. It's about how people respond to adversity. The conclusion is powerful. When the world is shaken, we are given a choice not just between policies, but between tearing apart or standing together. Chaos often arrives first. It begins with blame. Governments accuse each other, media stokes panic, and citizens lash out in frustration. Social divides deepen, political factions exploit the crisis, misinformation spreads, and suspicion replaces solidarity. Protests break out. Minor disruptions escalate into unrest. In this environment, rational decision-making deteriorates, and emotional reactions dominate public discourse. Chaos is seductive. It offers someone to blame and something to destroy, but it yields no progress. The conclusion is grim. When chaos becomes the chosen path, humanity regresses, and solutions are buried beneath the noise of conflict and confusion. Collaboration, on the other hand, demands intention, maturity, and effort. It requires transparency between nations, compassion among people, and coordination between sectors. It's not the easiest path, but it's the only one that leads forward. When scientists, policymakers, and citizens work in sync, even the most complex crises become manageable. Collaboration turns isolated panic into collective problem solving. Resources are shared, knowledge is pooled. Trust is built. The result is not perfection, but progress. The conclusion is clear. While chaos consumes, collaboration constructs, and in a disrupted world, construction is the only path to survival and stability. International cooperation becomes vital during such global events. A closed strait doesn't just affect one country, it affects dozens. If each reacts alone, the problem compounds. But when nations coordinate efforts, from shared naval escorts to joint supply networks, they minimize damage. Diplomatic bridges built during crisis often endure beyond it, reshaping geopolitics. Collaboration creates room for long-term peace and economic stability. Multinational task forces and intergovernmental agreements become the backbone of recovery. The conclusion is strategic. True resilience is not found in isolation, but in interdependence managed through diplomacy, empathy, and mutual commitment to a shared future. On a local level, communities also face the same crossroads. Panic buying, discrimination, and distrust can either grow or be replaced by generosity, support networks, and civic solidarity. Communities that choose to collaborate weather storms better. Food drives, shared transport, neighborhood safety plans, and mental health check-ins become small but mighty defenses against widespread fear. Local media, schools, and religious centers can foster unity and truth. The crisis becomes a chance to reconnect and reinvest in community bonds. The conclusion is inspiring. When people choose to support one another rather than fear each other, humanity becomes stronger than the crisis itself. Technology, often blamed for division, can become a powerful tool for collaboration. Global platforms can spread verified updates, facilitate donations, and connect people across continents. Crisis response apps can match resources with need in real time. Video conferencing enables leaders, experts, and even families to coordinate faster than ever before. Scientists from rival nations can work together on shared data. When used with responsibility, technology bridges gaps: cultural, political, and logistical. The digital world becomes an arena for unified action. The conclusion is evident. Even in a fractured world, our tools can be turned toward healing if wielded with collaborative intent. Education plays a key role in how future generations will respond to crises. In the aftermath of disruption, schools and universities must choose what lessons to highlight. Do they teach nationalism and self-preservation, or do they emphasize interdependence, cooperation, and empathy? How history is framed defines how it repeats. Educational systems have the power to embed collaboration as a foundational value, not just a crisis response. Curriculums built around global citizenship and collective responsibility create citizens equipped for shared futures. The conclusion is long-term. If we want a collaborative world tomorrow, we must teach its value today. Religious and spiritual institutions also face a defining choice. In crisis, they can either fuel division with ideological blame or offer comfort, unity, and hope. Many of the world's religions share values of compassion, charity, and shared humanity. These values can be activated at scale in response to global disruption. Faith leaders, when unified in their messaging, can temper fear and build trust. Mosques, churches, temples, and synagogues become centers not just of worship, but of relief and togetherness. The conclusion is moral. When spirituality serves collaboration, it turns fear into faith, not in doctrine, but in humanity itself. Environmental sustainability emerges as a collaborative challenge that transcends borders. A blocked strait may remind the world of its fragile infrastructure, but it also echoes the bigger truth: the planet is shared. Pollution, rising seas, and resource depletion respect no borders. The crisis becomes a metaphor. Just as no one is immune to a shipping disruption, no one is exempt from climate collapse. Sustainable adaptation, from energy reform to waste reduction, demands a united global approach. The conclusion is critical. Long after this crisis passes, the need for collaboration will persist, especially in the battle to protect the Earth itself. Ultimately, disruption strips away illusion and forces us to look inward and outward. In every corner of the world, people ask the same questions: are we alone? Are we safe? Are we prepared? But deeper than preparedness is choice. In chaos we let fear lead. In collaboration we lead each other. That's the essence of our test. Will we fragment under pressure or unite in purpose? The closed strait is not the end. It's an invitation to choose what kind of world we build from the wreckage. The final conclusion is this: crisis reveals who we are, but collaboration defines who we become.